Okay, I believe we're live.
We're back. 2020, first evolution hour of the year. After the frenzy, I'm even wearing my little Christmas sweater that I got as a gift over the holidays and all that. And we are returning to things. And in addition to what we'll be discussing along the way with our perpetual contested bones claptrap, where our little pals get starting repeating more and more creationist material and citing Jeffrey Tompkins, which we'll get to. You got the fact that we are hot and brought smiles to Jackson's face with the fact that we have a good prospect of having volume 1 of Rocks Were There out by the end of the month. And I'm currently plowing in all the information of our finished chapters and making little tweaks and stuff to make sure, like, for example, there are some charts that are quite long, virtually all of a page, and you can't split them up between the things. So in order to keep them on the right page, I've had to reformat and restructure how I'm phrasing the text and that, so it ends up as a unified blob. Those are just the little technical glitches and all that we get into it, making a rat pretty little book that will be about 500 or 600 pages long altogether, that will have literally some 2020 sources in it, as well as a pile up of technical literature from that 2018 and 2019. No one's going to accuse this of not being online. And as I was just mentioning, that eerily in my Twitter exchanges, just since I've got back, subject after subject that people bring up, I go, oh, Jackson and I have just included that in our book. We have a section on that very point. So this is going to be very, very useful for anybody that's trying to jump in to creationists who are trying to bring up orphan genes or mega sequences or any of this other claptrap, and are going, no, we got all that covered in the cornucopia of Rocks Were There Volume 1, and then we'll spend the rest of the year then working on Volume 2 that will, between the two of them, leave a flaming wreckage where Answers Genesis's books used to be. Oh, God, I cannot get over how blatantly incompetent so many of their arguments were, how tendentious and evasive and behind the curve. And it's across the thing from Georgia Purdom to Minton to Jeffrey Tompkins and Nathaniel Jensen. And then what's going to be real scoops. I don't think anybody has really spotted this before. And it only came about because between the two of us, we're looking at what Answers in Genesis are doing. And then we're looking at the topics that are being brought up and finding out what Institute for Creation Research is doing. I spent the holidays plowing through the last couple years worth of Acts and Facts at Institute for Creation Research, which was such a joy. But it meant that we were able to find out, here's some things that you may have heard about in creationism that literally no consensus on. One, what rocks are pre-flood? What rocks are flood? What rocks are post-flood? When did the flood start? When did the flood stop? Is catastrophic plate tectonics workable at all? Are floating forests viable at all? Does natural selection operate in nature in kinds or not? Every one of those is a point of dispute where they can't agree on that stuff. In addition to the stuff we've already built on the other ones, like the fact that they can't figure out which hominids are apes or not, although the consensus has been trending towards they're all humans, except for the obviously apey part. And so when they start getting into, so Australopithecines, those have all got to be apes. And then Homo habilis just becomes we don't want to think about that. And then everything else from then on, Neanderthals and Homo naledi and Demansi and all Demanisi, all of those become all human beings or not, depending upon who you're reading. So it's just a delicious mass of the creationists like to give the impression, Kent Hovind surely loves to give the impression, that somehow or other there's this kind of unified picture that there's relatively little quibble about. Oh, another one that gets on the list of no, there's no agreement at all is accelerated radioactive decay. That other than the minor fact that it vaporizes the earth, that just a teeny little problem. It's a little toasty for Noah and the kids. What can we say? Anyway, we're going to be marshaling not merely the junk that's in the Answers book, and even by their own standards, what's amazing is how behind the curve the Answers books are relative to the creationist technical literature, because they tend to be, they're not really citing their own stuff much. And that's even with the ones where they've done reissues. But that in part Because if they do start diving into these little fistfights, what Answers in Genesis tends to do is just retread the surface apologetics, the kind of stuff that Ken Ham would be talking about in debating a Bill Nye. They're not really diving down into ALU pseudogenes and whether Horacotherium is in the horse baramin or not. But when you do start diving in, if you have the stomach for it, by all means go into the Answers Research Journal, which is available online, and all of these stupid acts and facts that are online, and a preemptive bit about why supporting every organization, not just me and Pelagia, and there's so many other people out there, Jackson, anybody who's got a thing, whether you're doing it by monetized videos or whether you're helping at their Patreon or whatever, I'll be thanking all the Patreon people. And we got a new Patreon this week too. That little bit by little bit building up. Just remember what we're up against. That the Institute for Creation Research is so rolling in dough that not only can they maintain their glossy little websites and their free material and opening up their own little museum where they have a creation research thing that the Institute for Creation Research has opened up, they can send me every bloody month free hard copies of their damned Acts and Facts book magazine. They can afford to do that. That shows you how much money is circulating around in that area. And lowly little schnooks like us, who are college students and retirees, who are building off of a network of, all we have are the facts. Sorry. And that they're trying to make what we can with what we can freebies. Although we are a monument to how much you can do without any money.
That's true.
Yeah. That if you have any, like a buck, when you think about that next latte or whatever, think, yeah, maybe I can become a Patreon of the project, and a little bit by little bit by little bit, all that stuff adds up. Eventually, I'm going to reach a threshold point where I'm too much to qualify for the deduction that the state pays for my Medicare, which I'm healthy, so I'm not actually using it, but it's still like $150 a month or something. That will then come back out of my Social Security if that hits. So there's a awkward I'm in that uncanny valley of how much can you start getting in as income without bumping over. So anyway, that's the situation there. On the fun and games with contested bones, we've got the fact that, as a matter of fact, I alluded to this. I put a reference to this in the new book because they go after the beta-globin pseudogenes at this point, relying on, guess who? Jeffrey Tompkins. So surprise, surprise, and surprise, surprise, they repeat a bunch of sources that are in Jeffrey Tompkins's paper. Isn't that nice? So it's basically that A, it ain't a pseudogene because there can't be pseudogenes, and B, like it's functional, and of course, yeah. And so this begs the whole question is, pseudogenes exist, but they can become functional. They can be inveigled into the system because the system is there's a word kludge that's being used. It's
spurious.
It's kind of cobbled, yeah. And so what's fascinating about all of this, and we go into this in laboriously delicious detail on all of the different genetic systems that have come about precisely because of gene duplications, co-opting and mutations and frame shifts and retrotransposons and oh my god, and you'll learn about bug testes in the book.
They're quite varied, as Darwin pointed out.
Yeah. And they're a field for these epigenetic markers, and a lot of these funky little orphan genes are things because the genes that generate the new body are kind of like a little corn nugget, and it can shuffle real quick when you have the one chance to carry that over to the new organism. And so there's an area where there's a whole bunch of little epigenetic things that have their little fingers in the pie, so to speak, that can inveigle themselves into this, especially among those arthropods. I think people will be really funky pleased with the new book because of like the full geology charts that we've got into it, and that phylum thing.
Oh yeah, that's it's pretty interesting. It was a very last minute addition that I was kind of just thinking about one day because I was still kind of dealing with Meyer's book, or I was thinking about Meyer's book because we did the video because PragerU was repeating his tropes. And so I was kind of thinking about the phyla. So I was like, well, why don't we put it in context? Because what destroys creationism more than putting the argument in context?
Yeah, chronological and thematic. And so between the two of us, we've got I think it runs about 9 pages or so in the whole book. There's the first 2 pages are just straightforward, the list of the phyla. There are 35 animal phyla, but they're not the same ones that I had in my book 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Because some of them have been merged and others have been split to where they realize there's actually been so much divergence in that phylum that it's actually another phylum. Yeah. And so supposedly, according to creationism, phyla can't be generated. They're fixed. They're immutable. They're the kind of, even though none of them,
well, that's
literally,
intelligent design, isn't it?
Yeah. No anti-evolutionist ever claims that a phylum is a created type. I don't know of any. If anybody has ever heard of it, no, they're way below that level.
Well, the funny thing is, well, actually, Fazal Rana and Stephen Meyer say it in principle, but I don't think they'll ever actually apply it, because as soon as you get to humans, it breaks down, of course.
Oh, of course, they don't want to. Yeah, because we're all the same phylum as dinosaurs. We're in the chordate phylum.
And tunicates.
So that's a field that won't work on that one. The other thing that really struck me, and it was only when I made the second chart, which was first off, oh, by the way, all the phyla will have technical references, so you can actually look up some of the stuff on each one of that material as well to kind of get you up to speed on some of it, especially the newer ones. These little wacky little phyla that
like Rhombozoa
just appeared. Just in the last 20 years or so, which begs the question: what did God just make those phyla, the one that don't have fossil records, like 5 minutes before they were first discovered? You know, when exactly were these phyla made?
And like Canthocephala and Gastrotricha and all
the fact that you would because I've been watching your videos on protostomes and deuterostomes and all of these deep things, and I thought, well, why don't we just do a chart where we're clustering the phyla according to those classifications and then kind of put them in phylogenetic relationship. So ones that are closely related will be as little master blocks with little dotted lines across them. And it was suddenly when I was through with all that, I'm going, holy smokes, almost all the phyla are protostomes.
Yeah.
Almost all the organisms are protostomes. We poor pathetic little deuterostomes are like pimples on the back ass of that.
It's 32 of 35, I think.
Yeah, 32 out of 35. And even more likely if you include some of the extinct phyla, if you include...
like hyolids and chancellorids and all those things.
Yeah, those are all likely protostomes, even though you can't be absolutely certain of it. And a few of them actually are listed that way. So and if you list off what the deuterostomes are, they're echinoderms, and then the hemichordates and the chordates. That's it. Yeah. So you got things that look like starfishy things, and then you got wiggly stuff, and then things with backbones, and that's, wow, it's important because that's us, but yet in terms of total species count, they're just paltry in terms of the number of families in that. And then you look over at that monster. No wonder the damn protostomes dominate the world, that they have found the kind of the secret key to durability. Arthropods, and I put in a reference to the fact that insects are very difficult to go extinct. Of all of the groups, the arthropods are the most extinction resilient. They get a little bit of a speed bump. They'll kind of go, oh, was there an asteroid? Oh, I feel kind of bad. Well, okay, let's get back on going to the thing. And so that's, I think the Permian mass extinction was the only mass extinction that insects suffered a bit from. Everyone they just go through bye dinosaurs, see you later. We nice cockroaches are going to just keep going. Yeah. And so it puts a different perspective into things. That also there's the puzzle aspect of how much information can I cram into a single chart and have it. I had to cross check with my niece and that because says, can you read this at all? Too small, too increase the print and all that. So I had to do some little tweaky things. 6 and 7 point are probably about at the limit of convenience to make some of these things. But the main thing is I did want to have an awful lot of information. The chart I built off of the old one that I did in the old tip, which was list off all the phyla, whether they have a fossil record or not. That's first order. What's the earliest official fossil? The absolute certain this is it. And then what's the ones where they're kind of circumstantial? where maybe they date farther back because of trace fossils and other things, but so there's multiple layers of things, and you can get a perspective, first of all, about so
like
many of the
nematodes.
phyla have no fossil record.
Yeah.
And or if they do, they don't go very back far. So if anybody tries to give you the claptrap of, well, all the animal phyla existed in the Cambrian, I'll go, oh, you're an evolutionist, aren't you? Because you're the only one who can say that with a straight face.
Well, and yeah, you're right. It's like nematodes were probably around in the Paleozoic, but they don't show up till the Jurassic. So
yeah, and I think the oh god, what the hell are they? Bryozoans or something where they're still. It looks like maybe they popped along a little bit after that
in the Ordovician. Yeah, they might have been like one of the few groups to actually pop up after the Cambrian.
Yeah, and it'd be wonderful we get our little time machine and go back there and see what was going on with the little beggars.
That would be
but
nice.
There, yeah, it'll be it will be a cornucopia of reference material and technical literature and more creationists with their head up their ass than you could ever imagine could be stuck in one place.
All of them. It's all of them.
All of them. Yeah, and I think it's nice because via either the main references or the footnotes, that we can bring up a lot of little side issues and other issues as well in terms of the background context. Don't forget for a moment that there's a political backside to creationism.
Oh, heck yeah.
That creationists connect up with that culture camp subculture that links up to this very day. There are people who are vocal on television supporters of Donald Trump who think the earth is 6,000 years old and link up to Ken Ham. So that this is not something where I'm going, well, you're just making a diatribe about their politics. No, excuse me. They're applying their bad method, the same method that allows them to think the earth is 6,000 years old. They're applying to politics and war-making policies and abortion policies and health issues and environmental issues. Australia is on fire right now, and it's because of climate change. Watching the footage on that on the NewsHour tonight was unnerving. If you've ever seen The Martian with all of that orange landscape, that's literally what everything looks like in Australia in those fires, that they're in broad daylight and everything is orange cast and cloudy. And then there's a little car over next to a thing and there's floodlights and you can see normal color over in that little bubble of the fact that everything else is so hazy. And I've experienced some of the local fires here where we had a couple seasons ago, some bad fire. And we were getting dust storms, even the things, it gets that orange quality to it. So it's like a fog, but otherwise. That this is looking like this is going to be permanent for Australia, and that it's exhausting for the firefighters as well as insurance and property values and all of that to realize that wherever you go, you're likely to be burnt out within 5 years, and that's very, very troublesome. Anyway,
we did a video on climate change, by the way.
Yes, which I watched there as well. Of the fact that that's another one that connects up to that culture camp network. I'm an old fart who's been studying this from like the 1970s on. So I'm aware of the fact that way before the current branch of Heartland Institute crowd, which starts coming in really in the turn of the century, our century, you got
that's good.
anti-environmentalism.
You're not that old, RJ.
Well, but my mindset of when I was growing up, the turn of the century was 1900. So I'm thinking in terms of that, and I have to kind of tweak myself. No, that's the century before the thing. And so we've got a little bit different. The turn of the century is now 2000. And that's about the era when the Heartland Institute in the 1990s and so forth, which was coming up over complaints about carbon issues. Australia, by the way, I think had a carbon tax and they decided to get rid of it because they have a conservative government and they may want to reconsider that under the circumstance. But anyway, anti-environmentalism goes all the way back to that Jerry Falwell area, and Kent Hovind comes from that same environment in the 1980s and 90s, and so that the people who can't figure out how many zeros there are in the age of the Earth are also trying to make decisions about what we're supposed to do about the CO2 that we're pumping into the air and whether it really means something. And that then filters downstream to Senator Inhofe bringing a snowball into the Senate and saying, see, there's no such thing as global warming because there's snow outside. Yeah. And you have to go. And so this this methods issue, it bites. This is not a tangential thing. This is not, well, he's just talking about footnotes in a David Minton article. I mean, that doesn't really refer to anything. The dynamic substructure of this stuff, Tony Perkins and the Family Research Council that connects up to creationism, and then
it does. It
does.
Tony Perkins is part of the actually fun. I was actually just reading about this the other day. Perkins connects up to Beisner, who wrote a chapter against climate change in the Answers book 3, I think, and they are all together with Wendy.
And
they connect.
He's the head of this. He's the
Wendy
head
Wright.
of this. I can't remember the name of the thing off of it. It's a something or other council or something. He's the current head of it that has been working with the Federalist Society and others to get conservative judges on the court. And that, so that this, they have a shadow. Talk about the deep state that they're, jump in.
They're they connect up with Wendy Wright, who was the lady the blonde dunce who talked to Dawkins. And I was thinking about that because it's kind
homeschooler, Farkins or whatever his name is, Ferris, I think his name is. That's the head of the homeschooling network that are largely creationists, and one of his big assistants has ended up in the Justice Department under Trump.
Yeah, it's kind of a package deal, and I was thinking about it in terms of PragerU, for instance, because PragerU has put out videos arguing against climate change. And it came really as no surprise when they also started doing anti-evolutionism. These ideas are all linked together.
Yeah, and if you so it's no coincidence that the National Center for Science Education in the late 90s and right around the turn of the century, our century, started paying attention to anti-environmentalism and climate science claptrap too. Because they were noticing exactly the same thing, that a lot of the same people are showing up, and there's a cross connection going on in here. So make no mistake about it, that anybody who has a sense about what modern politics is doing and environmental policies, you better jolly well know the players, and you're going to discover an awful lot of the players have an asterisk next to their name: anti-evolutionist, 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 anti-evolutionist. And after a while, that starts looking like a pattern.
Once is an anomaly, twice is a trend.
Yeah, and it's the point where that's one of the reasons anybody that follows me on Twitter will know that I have my little secret questions I like to ask people that aren't secret because I ask them right out in the open. And so I'm going along, I bump into Donald Trumpistas and that all over the place. And after a while, after I get past the initial bit, I'm going, by the way, many Trump supporters are anti-evolutionist, creationist, and climate science denialists. What's your view on those subjects? He asked disingenuously. And most of the time they don't actually reply, but often as not, they do. And although there are exceptions, the odds are they will be anti-environmental, they will be anti-evolutionist, and they will be a climate science denialist. And more likely, in fact, on the climate science denialism, that's a bigger demographic than the creationists. So you can find people that they have no problem with the age of the earth. They don't really think about evolution. Really, they may be religious, but they're not obsessive about it. But yet they are buying into that pro-business model element of the climate science issue. But then when we move over to the age of the earth matter and natural branching speciation, always remember that you should have two questions in mind here. You can ask them, how old do you think the earth is? That's one. That filters out the young earth creationists. The other is, do you accept that all life on earth is related by natural common descent? That's the evolution part. And you'll find that some will be able to say, oh, I have no problem with the earth being billions of years old and the universe being billions of years old, but they're still anti-evolutionists. That's your intelligent designers and your old earth creationists. So you can't use that age of the earth thing as an instantaneous filter for all the branch of anti-evolutionism. But anti-evolutionism and the climate science issue are almost dead giveaway diagnostics for that culture camp creationist subculture. And if you get them kicking up that and Donald Trump in spades, bingo, trifecta, I get to put some more beans on my bingo card, my Trumplandia bingo card. So if you want to see what Tortukans look like in power, look at the Trump administration. That's the most Tortukan administration I've ever seen. We had bits and pieces of it. RJ's off on a political rant here. We've had bits and pieces of it,
It is your channel,
in the past. So. You're probably, most of the people watching the show are probably too old to remember James Watt and the Reagan administration. James Watt was, for a short while, the Secretary of the Interior, I think he was, in Reagan's administration. And he was being called to account because he didn't seem to be terribly concerned about protecting the environment. And he said, well, that's because Jesus is coming back any minute, and so it doesn't really matter what we do. That he actually had that. Woo! Needless to say, in those old days, when the Reagan administration, by modern day Republican standards, was a wacky liberal on a lot of these science issues, because they actually paid attention to the science, and he was quickly junked out. And most of the, both father and son Bush, are, by comparison to the wacky ideologues of the Trump administration, fairly level-headed on a lot of these issues. They dig their heels in a lot. That shows you how things have moved. So the Tony Perkins worldview, if you are familiar with all of that complaints, if you can find his Family Research Council thing, you can subscribe freebie to his little blurbs and all that.
Quiverful, that's another one of those.
Have the stomach for it.
Isn't Quiverful another one of those?
Yeah, and then you have another nexus that floats around that. You've got David Barton's Wall Builders. That connects us up with Glenn Beck, because he's a big David Barton guy. He's the pseudo history, America's a Christian nation, all of that stuff. And
he actually came to Shreveport a couple years ago for like a new book, and he was at like the Barnes and Noble and all that. So.
Was that the Thomas Jefferson book that got axed?
It might have been. My grandmother called.
We're talking a Barton or Glenn Beck.
Beck.
Oh, Beck. Yeah, he's still publishing things, but he still sings the praises of that stuff. I follow him on Twitter now. He's one of my little buzz things. I home in on litmus test people, ones that are reflecting not only their own head up ass, but they represent lots and lots of other head up ass. So you can follow a series of litmus test characters that a lot of the ones that were litmus test people from 20 or 30 years ago are not on social media. Pat Buchanan is still sitting around. I think he's probably a little desiccated gnome by now. That's from the Reagan era. But he's not an active player. Dinesh D'Souza has gone on radio silence lately. Right. Yeah, and so I look around to see ones that I follow. I don't follow a huge number of people.
He might be writing a new book, and that's why, or something.
New is a relative term for Dinesh.
He might be writing, let me say, another book.
An iteration of his previous diatribe, with a new title and that, and a lot of the same resources.
Someone made a joke about his book. Was it The Lie? It's like Snakes on a Plane. It was a working title they forgot to change before the published.
Oh yeah. Oh. In fact, because I've got my files open on here. Let me see if I can locate it.
Or The Big Lie. That was the name of it.
That was his most recent one. One of our. If you think that kind of stuff is really screwball, wait till you see the stuff that we've got in our book.
Oh yeah.
that we've got material that makes that seem kind of normal. And one of the ones that we have, and this is nothing new because you're already aware of it, the geocentrism angle.
Oh yeah.
And we've got let's see, there's ones who are anti-Semites. There's the description that one guy had of let's see,
historical revisionists in
Robert,
there, like
Robert Soujanis. Robert Soujanis is one of the creepier fringe of the geocentric creationist movement. And the quote was, they said, he's a Holocaust denier whose lectures Peter Hess described as, quote, like trying to make sense of a Stockhausen symphony in an amusement park while tripping out with Timothy Leary. And if you ever listen to a Stockhausen symphony, you will discover just exactly how bad that is. And so there's some really creeperonis that are lurking around in the fringe areas, the ones beyond Kent Hovind. Kent Hovind is not the wackiest range of that worldview. And so we'll be introducing you, for those of you who have read
for the
Slam
uninitiated.
Dunk. you'll have encountered some of the surface details, but now that we're diving into the full-blown young Earth creationist angle in this book, we're naturally undercovering, we're raking through more, and little stuff like pus is coming up, and
it's everything. I mean, we occasionally we'd come across things, and even we were like, "What the heck is this?"
Yeah,
the guy who published. It's like some Islamic creationist who published in some journal which may or may not be reputable. It's like, what is this?
Oh, and they're terrible. They're typographical errors up the yin yang. These are minor little journals that have loose standards. and he doesn't explicitly attack evolution too much in it. So you can easily see how they kind of slip through. Yeah, we've got a little box on him. In fact, I remember because I've got that format in here. Good gravy, where's our pages? We're having these cute little info boxes.
Oh, you're also at the half hour. You're also at the half hour.
Okay, about ready to go. He's in there somewhere. Oh, well. Anyway, the one thing that you're going to really be delighted, not only with volume 1, but eventually volume 2, is that I've been amazed at when I got back from Christmas, how many of the topics that were coming up with creationists online, I can put in. Oh, by the way, we've got a big section on that in the new book. We are really up on the stuff that creationists are using in their current apologetics of hacking, who brings up mega sequences and all the stuff on orphan genes that pop up, and the they found birds in the Cretaceous. Well, excuse me, we have a beautiful scoop, because we've got a catalog of all of the known theropods with feathers. 35 genera are now known. I was even amazed at how many there were, that when I was starting to look through on things, others had compiled a few bits of things, but stuff kept on coming on beyond that. So we are just a cornucopia of stuff. Halfway through, let me give my thanks to the patrons for the project. We just added a new one this bit, where Devin Miranda Reeves, thank you. You are a friend. And bit by bit, one thing after another. Whenever, if you're a fence straddler and you're wondering, should I funnel a little bit of money and become a patron of the project, just think of the fact that the creationists have so much bloody money knocking around that Ken Ham pulls down 200 grand a year from his projects, and Steve Meyer pulls down 150 grand a year from the Discovery Institute. I mean, there's money sloshing around on their side. Let's show that we got a little bit of slosh here. Anyway, our colleagues, Hendril and Eric Rowley and Speed of Sound and Cirrus, I will be getting back to doing audio. He finished up a bunch more of the audio chapters that I had recorded for the Paralogs of Phileas Fogg novel. And then he still got a bunch to do, and he had another project that took priority over this, and this is all freebie on his part. And so hopefully in the relaxation mode that I can go into for a while, after we finish the volume 1 of the book, I'm going to be recording the remaining chapters and that, so he can work on the grist on that. And then that'll be a new world that I'll be exploring, which is the audio book. Once we figure out all the techniques of how that goes, and the marketing and all the things to make it so people can get the audio book and pay money on it, then I can theoretically be doing that not only with the other Paralogs books, but going to be tough, Slam Dunk and The Rocksworth there as audiobooks. And because that's got to be structured very differently, because it's with references. You can't read a reference. So there's going to have to be a file available, probably up on my website, that anybody can download, that will be the references for these things that we'll be able to do in conjunction with the audiobook. But that's the way I'm kind of thinking ahead on it, that most of the main narrative can be done as an audiobook if it's structured properly. So anyway, that's something for 2022. We'll see how that works out. Anyway, back to thanking people. Our researchers, Travis Adams and ConvertMe and Eat Neil and James Fitzwater and Ralph McFadden and Pelagia. Hello, Pelagia. Benjamin Simpson, Ugly German Truths. Assistant researchers Mike Apple and Ian Shannon Dorunku and Totus Real, and our friends Daniel and Stephen and Mary Gale and Insects Are Cool and Devin and Morton Nielsen and Puffalophagus and Bo and Steigels and Alex and Paul. And I still will thank the legacy patrons, people who were able to help at one point or another, Jen and Jody and John and Keith and Andrew and Dyer and Yui and Mona and Brad and Daniel and Nana and Sun Sky Stone and Everett and Sewer and Zeshi. Every one of you has made it easier to plunk along 1 week and 1 month after another to fight the good fight. We've got a lot of project out there to deal with, and what's fun though, I can honestly say that neither one of us could have written the New Rocks book even 5 years ago.
That's true.
That the kinds of information that is available to us, oh, the joys of Google searching, and to where I go, oh my heavens, creationists, you shouldn't have cited that source, because we can look it up now. We can find the original material, even 19th century books that we're able to drag out and find full text. And then you discover, uh-oh, you haven't read that closely, did you? You're misrepresenting the material. And so now the interesting issue, like all that stuff we do with Minton, is was Minton's brain in gun cotton, or is he lying about his source? That either he's got to misunderstand the content of it and have his head so up his ass that he's just a fuddlehead. Like I don't. For those of us who are very old, will remember Clem Diddlehopper, a character that Red Skelton used to do on his old TV show back in the 1970s, in the ancient days of NTSC television with rabbit ears. And anyway, Clem Diddlehopper would be that sums up in about 10 seconds, a few seconds, the Clem Diddlehopper character. Well, that's the alternative for some of these creationists, because either they are reading carefully what they see and consciously misrepresenting the material, or they're fuddle brains so enamored of a dogma that they're just skating through it, hunting for authority quotes and bliplets and not really thinking clearly about it. We got to deal with that. That comes up with Ariel Roth and his stupid coral reefs, where he's making up numbers. Some of those things are absolutely inexplicable. The numbers are not in, or he's totally misrepresented stuff. Like at one point he confuses the
width with height.
The differential relationship between the high and low level with the amount the coral has grown. It's not the same thing. Nope. And it was clear what the original paper was talking about. I have a higher delight with the meticulous and interest of these older papers that we're encountering, where they admittedly didn't know a lot of the things that we knew, but boy, they're doing their damnedest to make sense of the data field.
Oh, yeah. I've been reading The Voyage of the Beagle recently. No one can fault Darwin for not being a careful person. Oh my God, he did a lot of stuff.
And a remarkably good writer. Yeah. And that was one of the reasons why Darwin, when The Voyage of the Beagle came out, that made him kind of a superstar. It was a book that sold very widely. He was still keeping that evolution thing under wraps, he was. But which he was developing during that same period. It was like the thing that was it was the elephant in the room, where he's going, oh, I'm collecting collections. I've got files after files. I got to write somebody else. I don't want to tell anybody about this because it's gonna really hit shit fan. And we have to remember too that when he was starting this project, there had been a big flap about this book by Chambers. I can't remember the title of it offhand. It was like something. Anyway, it was a quasi. Imagine if Deepak Chopra had written an evolution book. Yikes. That it was a clumsy, half-baked attempt. And by the way, the book was written anonymously, and a bunch of people kind of figured out who it was. So the point is that this got dumped on by everybody. It was just a furor in the 1840s over this thing. And if you look up any biography of Darwin and that, there'll be sections on it. You can find out about that. And so he was still probably laboring under that, oh my heavens, if I do this book without overwhelming documentation, I'm going to be hit on the same way. Vestiges of Creation, that's what it was called, Vestiges of Creation.
Charles Lyell in Principles of Geology had actually dumped on a couple different early formulations.
And including Chalmers, I think. Vestiges of Creation. By any standards, it was a clumsy effort. It was as bad as Darwin's grandfather's a stab at kind of a quasi-evolutionary view. And so what nobody realized is that there could be a much more sophisticated game going on, And the other factor was that Darwin had built up in the meantime a really solid reputation. That 10-year sidebar he spent on doing barnacles established him as one of the pioneering, brilliant scientists of his time, to the point of where everybody knew Darwin's no fool. If Darwin says this is a legitimate thing, it's important. So when he finally got around to doing the book after being prodded, Lyell kept on saying, this Wallace kid is coming up with similar ideas. You better do something on it before he beats you to the punch, and go, yeah.
I mean,
and then Wallace did.
What's interesting is that Darwin, even during his voyage, because he was collecting fossils, and then when he was sending them back to Owen to look them over and stuff, he was already gaining this reputation even by that point, by the 30s, the mid 1830s, and so he was a people were already starting to be like, hey, he's a smart guy. And so you're right with the barnacles.
And every modern scientist, I have a little thing on it. I think it's in tip 1.4 or 5, 1.5, Dissing Darwin at my website. That goes into some of the people who have been dumping, Darwin's a bad scientist and he doesn't have an unjustified reputation. You ask a scientist about that. If you want to know who a good fiddle player is, you ask another fiddle player. And if you want to know who a good systematist or zoologist is, you ask another one. And everybody that works in field work is just, we are unworthy when they read the anal retentive meticulousness, fairness, and care with which Darwin went through, and continued to revise his work down to his dying day, because he was always hunting around. And so the later editions of the book have all these little footnotes that if you want to see what dusty, boring 19th century science prose looks like, read the later editions of Darwin, where you've got these little footnotes in there that run on for half a page, where he's talking about in the most scientific-y way what's going on, that if you're a geek, you know what the hell he's talking about, but you're going, this is a long way removed from Richard Dawkins. Dawkins never goes anywhere like that, because the styles and all that and what our standards are changed. And since it looks like I keep on jumping into it and then forgetting by my digressions, the linkages that we put in on the pseudogenes and the ancient globin pseudogene bit. So there's a paper that I put in from, I think, from Chu, who follows up on some of the globin genes and how there was an evolutionary trend in the New World monkeys from that. They're citing this Harris work that unfortunately isn't open access, so I didn't worry about that. It was one of the ones that worked out the primate psi beta 1 gene and ancient beta-globin pseudogene. So the regular science community accepts that there are chunks of the beta-globin genes that have become pseudogenized. They're still active beta-globin genes as well, and there's this alpha beta split. So the globin superfamily is just really big. There's stuff going on, and so the hemoglobin part is just a little teeny niche that we fancy vertebrates have developed in our own particular way, although even that goes back farther than in the vertebrates. But anyway, that they're effectively relying on Ruppy and Sanford are effectively just copying the argument that Jeffrey Tompkins trotted out in 2013. So I put the linkage up to that, and also a link up to Lawrence Moran, who took Tompkins to task over his complete misrepresentation of technical literature. This will come as a shock to nobody who will have read The Rocks Were There. But anyway, there was the problem in there, and we allude to it in the book and that as well, that there was this some of the particular papers where he was just getting it wrong as to what the gene was supposedly doing. And given the fact that Jensen has scientific credentials in the same way that Georgia Purdom does, and Sanford to some extent, they have no business being this stupid. And so you got to wonder what's going on in their head that gets their little brain going into Clem Kadiddlehopper mode again and again and again. It's not an isolated thing. It's a tragedy and a travesty to look that if you take the answers books, as we have done, and you start analyzing, okay, here's your claim. Are you offering evidence for it? Too many times some of the weren't even offering evidence for stuff. But when they do, this is the best you can do. I mean, wow. And so we've had a delightful time. An awful lot of the biological material, Jackson, you already knew about, So you were building off of the information you already knew, and then a lot of the paleontological material I kind of already knew about. But it was in a lot of these crossover areas, in a lot of these very new cutting edge biology fields, when creationists would stupidly blunder into a topic that turns out to be really interesting, and it's not helping their case to have brought this up.
Oh yeah, actually, in sort of, because I've already started drafting part of the Minton chapter. I've already gone through his whole chapter on Tiktaalik, and oh god, it's bad. It's just so hilariously bad.
And that one was really going to be funky because we're going to be able to do so much. There's been so much newer paleontology on that paleo world.
It's funny you say that because there's really nothing in it. The chapter is, what is it? Is Tiktaalik the greatest missing link? He doesn't mention Tiktaalik till the second half of the chapter.
Yeah, it's all smoke and mirrors. Oh, by the way, what I think will be nice for the second volume one is you go ahead and write a summary thing of the first book. That will give your perspective on the talking points and things that you think is effective. Sure. Basically, all the subheadings in that first chapter will be the chapter titles right. of the previous thing.
Yeah,
then I'll put in my perspective, and that way between the two of us we'll have covered a lot of the bases. I'm anticipating that one will probably be 25 pages, something like that, probably can cover.
But the thing was, one of the pieces that Minton mentions, because there's some really interesting Evo Devo work that's kind of coming into play with the fish tetrapod transition. And he kind of accidentally blunders into the bit about fingers. Are fingers homologous to fin rays, or are they independent developments? And it turns out they're actually probably independent. There's some overlap with the Hox genes that's occurring in the region that is like the fin ray finger region, but the fingers are actually independently developing, which is why you have like 8 in Ichthyostega, which then gets kind of downsized to 5. So,
yeah.
But of
and
course,
in fact, all of those early tetrapods have 6, 7, 8 fingers. And it's because they're coming out of critters that are basically living in the water most of the time. So they just need to paddle around and maneuver and all of that. But once you get to be a land tetrapod, too many fingers become inconvenient. And what's fascinating about it is that giant bottleneck that occurs, because effectively 5 gets to be the model, and that it locks in that pentadactyl format to where there's been no 6-digit, except just occasional glitches in individual, like Anne Boleyn apparently had a 6 finger, but there's been no move back to that mode. And in contrast, there's been the interesting divide. It's always fascinated me as a kid, and now we're in the stage where they're working out why that's so, is that mammals are kind of boring in that, with few exceptions, have 5 fingers. There's a few variations, and technically speaking, horses are running on just 1 toe and all that kind of stuff. But those are relatively minor players. Right. Whereas dinosaurs drop fingers like nobody, boom, boom, boom. And so their variations are a lot. And of course, their bird descendants have the shrunk down digits to where they're only dealing with 3 of the fingers. And so they're frame shifting. And that means that the regulatory cascades that are operating in the Archosaur dinosaur bird line are different than the kind of things that have developed specialized in mammals. The other thing are like neck vertebrae. Dinosaurs expand neck vertebrae at the drop of a hat to where these sauropods, they'll have, some will be like 15 vertebrae and some will be like 25. It's a huge variety between taxa on these kinds of things. And it's relatively easy to think about how that could be done in terms of just a clusters of alanine repeats in the HOX13 gene creates a digit things here. There's probably a counterpart to it that they're still working out with neck vertebrae. Move to mammals and boring city, where other than, I think, sloths and manatees are the only mammals that don't have 7 neck vertebrae.
Yep.
And they have just 1 more or 1 less. It's just what it's that
something like that.
Minor.
Yeah.
And so now partly it's because, especially in relation that the mammals are so many runners, that thoracic vertebrae, for example, are locked in. There's a dynamic, and we mention it. I think I mentioned it in Slam Dunk, or we're maybe mentioning it in
it was in the first chapter because it's a relatively new paper, actually.
Yeah, and about the fact that there's a constraint on the dynamics of that ability to run and the ability to add on extra. There's no advantage to adding on additional vertebrae in that respect if you're an ocelot, or even just a slog around thing. So the mammals have a very different dynamic, and yet your bird dinosaur bunch are really boring when it comes to like their jaw skull layout compared to their archosaur ancestors, where a particular bone gets expanded into the beak, and they're still got the standard dentary squama or articular quadrate jaws issue. But mammals pull jaw bones up into their ears, and they're doing all sorts of wacky things and developing new dynamics. And so that's telling us something that's very specialized in those lineages that the Evo Devo people are doing all the work on, and no creationist is spotted doing anything on it at all, as far as I know.
I think the dinosaur teeth are mostly like relatively uniform, aren't they? Whereas like mammals are, just all over the place.
Mammals are the only ones with differentiated teeth. That we have molars and in fact the complex cusp forms that allow you to identify. Again, we've cited it in the old book and also in this new one about the fact that they've retro-engineered 100 million years of rat teeth to where they found just a couple genes interact to produce the cusp formations on those complex teeth. And they've retro-engineered, by just permuting those little variables, a whole bunch of tooth forms, ones that we know among current animals and one that's known in an extinct mammal cousin. So now we know the circumstance of this. The technology is really fast. But dinosaurs, basically they're simple rooted teeth structure. They often are producing new teeth. There's like a conveyor belt system that is constantly generating new teeth. In the case of ceratopsids and all that, these battery of cheese graters, because they now have to eat angiosperms. That's other areas where creationism just falls apart, because animals are relating to a specialized environment. And so we got the thing where was it Sanford or Tompkins who was arguing, or Snelling I think it was, who was arguing that the dinosaurs lived in a gymnosperm environment and the mammals are living in an angiosperm environment, and we're going, no.
that was Snelling. That was actually in the very last chapter.
It's I'll be intrigued to see all the reactions we get from our geologists better on it. That I'm thinking that
because good Lord, is it stupid?
Is there no end to the stupid? Well, volume 2 will show that apparently there is no end to the stupid.
I mean, it's just so hilariously short-sighted. Their arguments are Snelling saying, oh well, it's dinosaurs lived in the gymnosperm environment, never mind the almost 100 million years of angiosperms that also lived alongside dinosaurs.
And the amazing thing about all of the detailed geology work, if you ever start diving into those, is how much paleo ecology work is being done now, to where they are working out, well, there's the mountain range going on over there, and that was causing, we can use our climate modeling to figure out what the wind patterns are, and we know there has to be a monsoon thing going on because we're finding particular isotope relationships that are characteristic of particular kinds of things that occur only in a tip. And it's just this intricate, exquisite detective story. It's like CSI with the blood spatters, but on a whole much more complicated level. And then you turn to Answers in Genesis's cartoon. And it's just nothing.
Maybe there's like floating forest or something. Yeah. Maybe there are, these coral reefs that form instantaneously, and
things turn into rock. By the
mammoths.
Way, anybody out there whoever debates Kent Hovind, again,
sorry,
and if he brings up, which he's tended to do in the most recent debates that I have seen, he'll bring out, well, you can take a glass and you can put your little things in there and you can make layers from it. Here's the question you want to ask him. How many of those have turned into rock? That's the one area where literally we can find no example of any creationist trying to really work out how the hell does their laminated layers in their little Bertholdt triangles and stuff turn into rocks so bloody well fast. because it has to. And not only that, as you will recall from chapter 7, they've got situations where rock has to be baking at different temperatures in the same place.
Pretty much.
Try to do that in your oven.
Yeah, they want. There was an analogy that I once saw. It's like try to bake a cake on 1,000 degrees for 3 minutes. You know, that's what.
Yeah, some things that won't work well. There are crystals. When you read the geology literature, I love the things you'll do where they're talking about certain crystals form rapidly, and it's like in under 100,000 years.
Yeah, pretty rapid.
That's a rapid crystal. And some of them, however, aren't rapid. They may take millions of years to form to get to certain sizes. There are literally some crystal forms that will not make the little connections they do unless they're under intense pressure or intense heat or both. And that means depth and that means time. And it takes stuff to do. Now, some of those are found like at the top of mountain ranges. And the reason they are is because the land has been shifted through plate tectonics, and the same reason why you get the knot clams at the top of Mount Everest. That's another one where everyone doesn't know the difference between a brachiopod and a clam. And so when Kent Hovind was trotting out his open clam bit about the flood, excuse me, doofus, those are brachiopods. Those are not clams. They don't do that. So he's just behind the curve on that. So
they're literally different phyla of animals.
Yeah, that will have stuff on a lot of the internet idiots that will pop up. Standing for Truth, hope you're in the book. It's Nephilim free and the various people around there circulating around there, plus your Kent Hovinds and others. There's an awful lot of the ones that are circulating in the blogosphere world that are being alluded to, in addition to the fact that we're hitting not just stray pot shots. No, we're basically saying, here's their experts, and we're taking down every single one of them and all of their arguments.
Yeah, we are going through piecemeal, paragraph by paragraph, their different arguments. You're right. It's not just, it's not just, oh, well, they can't explain it. No, we are going through what they say is evidence. We're looking at their citations. We're going through those sources, and then we're comparing it against the modern literature for every single case, everything.
Yeah, and it's a structural issue that Jackson was approaching it exactly the way I did Philip Johnson and that back in the 1990s when I was starting to work on my work, which was you have their entire argument and you pull it apart and then you deal with it in order. And the problem is so many of these people, Johnson at least had a kind of coherent structure, whereas you get these rambling discourse where they're just cycling around the same points over again, that to deal with it in chronological, in order of appearance in the book, means you're hitting the same points over and over again. So what I've been doing in coalescing is to take some of that stuff and consolidating it. It's thematic. We're still covering everything, but we can talk about the 5 different times where the person is making the same stupid statement in the same bloody chapter.
Right. Yeah, because they will do that. They'll go like, oh, see above, they'll do that a bunch of times.
Yeah, and the one we can't avoid a certain amount of like, here we're hitting it at one level and then we're going to come back and hit it at another. One of the ones that is a recurring leitmotif through the tale is information.
Yeah.
Oh, the dreaded information. And the thing that we, I think, are doing a beautiful job on showing is that argument, whether it's from the young earth creationists or the intelligent designer, is a pile of dingo's kidneys. It is just a useless piece of dreck. It doesn't explain a damn thing. And DNA is not information in the way they need it to be to fit their little model.
Yeah, it's they want it to be both or they want it to be immaterial but have material effects. I challenge you to find an example of that in the universe.
Yeah. In fact, I was just adding a few little things. There'll be some little red sections. What I'll be doing once the book is done, then I'm putting all of my final versions of the stuff that I'm putting in the finished text. And that's going to be in this little cloud thing. Thank you, Pelagia, for producing a little cloud thing. Pelagia, after so many of the people, the people who, Bill Ludlow and others who dropped dead, in just the last year or two,
Yeah,
to where
way to put it.
Pelosi had a panic attack, and he goes, "What happens if RJ is like hit with a bus?" That he wanted a place where the stuff could be up, so that even if, or heaven forfend, you're hit by a bus, that you've got the thing that we've got this information out there, and that something can be done with it. So it can't be losable. And so we've been doing that. But anyway, on that point of genetic information, I was trying to come up with a good, handier description of it. And the fact that people need to get in their head, when the creationist talks about genetic information, they're really doing an origins or bust argument.
Sure. Pretty much.
To where does the initial coding come from? Who made the original replicator thing? Well, when you're looking at all the things going on with evolution, to where DNA is here, and then that's turned into a string here with the ribosome and blah, 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 and then it's mutated, and there's a thing that's duplicated, and the thing that's twisted around, and then it's get modified, and then it's get epigenetically methylized, and blah, 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 all that going on. None of that depends on how the original code started.
Right.
And instead, what you see in all existing organisms, without exception, is not the designed system. It can't be the designed system. It's the dim and distant descendant of the design system, even in the creationist model, where every single existing organism is not itself designed. God did not come down and make the elk that you see in the forest right there. Theoretically, there would be an elk kind that was made 6,000 years ago, and then a segment of that elk kind was put on the ark. Let's not ask too many details. And then all of the extant elkish things have come about by variation on a theme. But the original design events taking place before that. So what you see with all existing organisms are just the DNA molecule being converted into proteins by analog, and those proteins doing stuff that take on a role, and it does it automatically. It does it without anybody designing it. It does it without anybody meddling. It doesn't, because at the moment you try to think it does, what are you saying? That the designer is coming in and making stuff that do illnesses, and doing stuff that castrates crustaceans, and does all these weird things that DNA does. Do you really want to attribute this to design? Do you really want a coder doing that?
The bad stuff is Satan.
Ah, yes.
Checkmate.
Yeah. So the favorite example, they will have seen me use it in Slam Dunk, and it pops up here again, and I do it all the time on Twitter, is ALU. Yeah. ALUs. I'm amazed at the number of people, even who are kind of familiar with biology, who, when you ask them how many retrotransposon ALUs do you think are in our genome, and they'll kind of scratch their head and they think by my question, probably a lot, maybe 60, 100. And then I say 1.4 million and counting, 10% of our genome. And you suddenly go, whoa, is all that the same information? Is all that deliberately designed? And then you start looking at what the ALUs can do and what diseases they're involved in with the mutations. And now it's a slippery slope. So it's a perfectly good shorthand to do. There are a lot of other examples that you can use in the genetics. And if somebody has a particular interest, they can pick exactly one. But ALU is my favorite because it's funky. And to think about, 1.4 million little copy me things.
Copies of copies.
Yeah, and nobody, even Jonathan Wells, never even tried to show that every one of those is functional. Really?
Right.
Good job. Good try. Let's see what we go on that. Anyway, I didn't have the window up for the live chat, so I don't know what people have been commenting or how many people are watching or how many few.
I figured you were looking at that because
on the beginning of the year.
Whoops.
If there's any questions that you've seen or not. Whoops, unstable connection. I think, well, we're past the hour anyway, so we probably should cut it up here before we disintegrate. That have helped out, and everybody who wants to help out at Patreon and all the rest, you got the links at the website and the links here in the video, and tell everybody about it. Tell everybody about the new book. Believe you me, people are going to see notifications on Facebook and Twitter once we get the first volume out.
And YouTube.
Have links up to the thing, and YouTube and the YouTube on it, and we'll be putting around it, because I think that even more than Slam Dunk, as a practical guide to the head up your assism of creationism. It's on a scale that I can't think of any other book that's been done that dives into it with this range of comprehensivity.
I don't think there is one. I think this will be the most comprehensive book on countering creationism that exists thus far.
And the volume 2 will pick up, and there will be additional issues there, because we just barely scratched the surface of human evolution, which is going to be covered much more so. That whole area, we're just teasing people with Tiktaalik and stuff in the first volume, that there'll be much more detailed sections on that. And, and if you think we rake them over the coals on flood geology in this chapter 2 and chapter 7 of the volume 1, there's also chapter 2 in the second volume, where we'll be going into all the delights of the mythologies that go on, the ark hunting, all of the wackiness as to about creation is trying to rearrange the history of demographics and people's history and all of that. So there's a lot more fun stuff going on. And then, of course, Twinkle Twinkle Lyell Star on their weird cosmology.
We will have to find ourselves a physicist to read that part.
Yeah, it's there's some. It will be a funky area that I'll be daunted on, because that's the one that I'm doing as the main reading, and then he's going to be dealing. Yes, in fact, scavenge around on that. We'll have to start talking about people to find out, because I think there's some people in SciStrike's old network that have physics experience, and they might want to find around somebody with got a full-blown PhD in there in actual astrophysics that can.
I can probably find somebody. Yeah. We have a way of making connections, so I can probably find someone.
We got a little bit of time on it, because we still, once this is out of the way, I am at about 2/3 of the way through putting in chapter 4, which is chapter 4 of 7. And it's probably about a bit over 1/3 of the way through the text of the book, because chapter 7 is big, as you well know from having looked at it. It grew considerably from the original draft. I hope you found the additions delightful.
Oh, they all did, and they always are.
I think we've got an interesting synergy that goes on between us, because of the age differences and the fact that you're biology based and I'm old fart historian plus an interest in dinosaurs. And so there's a balancing act that goes on there, and the fact that we have the accessibility of the stuff. I mean, we've never physically been in the same room with each other, and we just log files back and forth.
We came close, though.
Yeah, came close. I was in the same state, but you were gone.
Yeah, by 2 days, man, that made me mad. Ugh, you'll have to come by again when I'm there this time. So
yeah. Anyway, everybody keep spreading the word on the project. Tell people about it. Say that RJ, yes, he's a talking head with no flashy graphics. I'm not anonymous like some people are, so there's no video cartoon that does the thing. I am exactly what it is you do. You can contact me, you can email me, I'm on Twitter and all the rest. And if any of you are on social media on Twitter like that, and you've been debating with creationists or wackaloons of any type, feel free to tag me into the conversation. I think Jackson doesn't mind being put in a lot of, unless it involves James Cole, in which case you won't be left out.
If you... Well, I have him on mute, so I see when other people respond to him with WTF, but I tell them don't bother with him. I do mind when people tag me on like those 48 plus people conversations. I instantly mute those. I'm sorry. I'm not doing that.
I triage and monitor those, because most of the time there's just a ping pong match that's going on that's been gone on before. But there are times when, if they bring up particular topics where new material is on the field and they're not addressing it because maybe they aren't up to speed on a lot of the stuff, then I can jump in and say, oh, by the way. Plus, there are some people on there that actually invite me, and they're saying, what does RJ think about this? Well, we should ask Rula. He knows about this kind of stuff. And to the best of my ability, I will attempt to do so. I just did a thing. Somebody was talking about a creationist Trump supporter was bringing up bird evolution.
Oh boy.
And he linked to a National Geographic article, which I'm positive was glommed onto secondarily from probably some intelligent design apologetics, where they pointed out, dun, 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 there were modern birds in the Cretaceous. Dun, dun, dun.
Okay.
And I'm going,
there weren't.
There were the base groups from which the neo-ornithines developed. So loons, I think, go back to the Cretaceous. There are a few others. But the problem is, 100 million years ago is a whopping 60 million years after the period in which birds, paravians, are starting to develop. That's 10 times the time frame between us and Lucy the Australopithecine. So this is a gigantic time frame. And the fact of the matter is, as we again discuss in the book, is that the creationists miss all of that stuff that's going on in the Mesozoic. Well, we don't.
I mean, that's just so silly because well, for one thing, they're not modern birds, as you said. They're the they might be the precursors of like the neorniths or whatever. But you also have the Confuciusorniths and the Enantiorniths and Hesperorniths and, Ichthyornis and all these other groups that have intermediate features.
You got Ornises up the yin yang.
Yeah, and yet no one ever really talks about them because
that's another thing that I think the comprehensive indexing that we're doing is going to be handy, because there are so many taxa names that are ones that you need to be kind of aware of on so many fields with creationism, that so many of them are so similar that you can easily get all flummoxed up on the difference between Ichthyornis and Ichthyosinophornis, and that they're different things living in different times.
Acrophoca and Afrophoca, because we actually got those confused.
Yeah, and what a difference the thing. And there's ants where just a couple little letters flipped around is a completely different family of ants. And so, that level, you have to be really, really meticulously careful, and everybody can, glum up on stuff. So we wanted to make a work that is going to be hilarious to read. We skirt the line. We break all the rules, because the typical sciencey book intends to be very dry and okay, but this is funny. Some of this stuff is just. You're going on that. And so there's a degree of conversationalism writing that we're doing.
I think between the two of us, you got 100% of the humor. So.
Well, you've got a droll sense of humor on there too. Yes, when you're anyone that can use to writing a text, you got a sense of humor in there. I am a little bit more droll and direct on some of the stuff. But anyway, the thing is that then the other opposite thing is to write like a Bill Nye style of stuff, which is not heavy on the documentation part. And we're not doing that. We're writing a conversational, informative work that is college level in terms of the technical literature and the familiarity with the stuff. So we're basically arguing you can do both. You can write. This is a different approach to how we're doing this kind of thing. That you don't have to be the kind of drawing room writing of Richard Dawkins. You can be both technical and snarky.
I do have to say, you once told me I have a Victorian sense of humor, and that has stuck with me.
Yes, and there's nothing wrong with that unless you're planning on living in the Victorian times. Anyway. So we're past our hour on that. Everybody that's still hanging on there, again, help out as you can. Let everybody know we're in the game for 2020 and beyond. This is going to be a bumpy road on here. And you think either one of us will ever get a chance to debate Kent Hovind again, or will he be running in terror from us?
Oh, you can have him. I have no interest in talking to that charlatan again. Same. I mean, I it's really the same for this like 7 or so little nitwits who are the dregs of creationism, but are also the only people who want to do debates, like Nephilim and Jungle Jargon and Kent and Standing. And you and I were talking with James a little while ago. It's the people who are willing to do the debates, and then you look at them and you're like, they're guys?
They're all the bottom feeder brigades. Yeah. Not one of those people are ones who are actually fact claimants on their side. The fact claimants shy away from those kind of debate exchanges. They do a few written ones. I think Jensen and others have had kind of interactions with Michael Shermer and that kind of
he talked level. To Dr.
But
Mays.
Not a lot of direct video material. Yeah, and in part, I think it's because a lot of the fact claimants are not necessarily schmoozy, where the one thing you can say about bumptious Kent Hovind and run off at the mouth Nephilim, that they're talkers, they're very direct, they've got they're comfortable with the microphone and all of that, and they can just on with the tropes and that. And a lot of science-minded people are introverted. They're not necessarily quick on the draw on the gift of gab stuff in that. So if you want to be a science communicator, follow the path of Alan Alda. And if you have a theatrical side, that helps. Get involved with theater and improv in particular, to where you can be able to marshal stuff on the fly and not be bogged down by the deflection mode, all of that. It's a skill that's not everybody capable of doing. I think it's been an advantage with me that I had theater. And so I was not uncomfortable around that kind of a context. And I have kind of a pigeonhole-y kind of mind and take notes fairly quickly, because the critical feature for any debate is that you need to be able to respond to stupid right then and there. You can't hope to be able to deal with it. You've got to be able to
debate's
turn
a show
on a dime. Yeah,
debate's a show, and that's kind of why I like to have discussions, because that way, in a debate you can blast 10 questions and the person you're debating can only respond to one.
Yeah.
And so with the discussion though, it's
I think the most interesting thing is to have a conversation where you've got a live audience. In the internet format is perfectly fine, and you're directly responding to their questions. And it's not one where you get a pile up of questions and you can only deal with 5 or 10 of them because the debater has insisted on only a 15-minute Q&A. Right. No. The discussion should be based upon those Q&A answers. And you'll notice that that creationists are really not keen on doing that kind of discussion.
No, which is funny because Kent Hovind, we know why Kent Hovind is always saying, I want my half, because he got bulldozed by Aaron, who would not let him run away. And that was hilarious to watch.
And the same thing with me, I endeavor to not, and Bill Ludlow. I mean, that anybody that can prepare, and yourself, that if you, too many of these people have the same shtick over and over again. That's actually an advantage for a debater. If they want to go a fixed format, that they're going to have to shut up at some point. And so then you want to make the most of your counterpunch to undermine their credibility at that other level. So we're right back to our 3 modalities of thinking that we need to get.
What I enjoy doing is when I have like a creationist or intelligent designer on my channel, like when I had Fazal Rana, and he mentioned a paper about, he's like, oh, well, researchers don't really know where mitochondria fits. And he mentioned a paper. Well, Rational Mind and Nestle went and retrieved the paper and said, actually, you're misrepresenting this paper. They're saying it's here. You're saying they don't know where it is. And he was like,
yeah. And that's an advantage of having people that have technical expertise that are in. I try to perform the same role when I am watching a debate, that I'm there. Usually I don't have a wrench, so I can't put in a direct link, but I can at least allude to stuff and call attention to stuff. Plus, you can get into little mini hissy fits with the ones that are in the other ones. Standing for Truth would be snarking back and forth, and there are several of them that they just go, oh, you evolutionists don't have any idea at all.
I just get mad watching debates, because when I listen to Standing or Kent, I know I shouldn't, because, and I know I've seen other people say, like, when they were younger, they watched debates and they'd get mad because they're like, oh, that person is lying or wrong or whatever. And then eventually they just kind of get over it. I'm still at the point where I'm getting mad at people.
It's moral outrage. And when you're young, you're not inured to generations of stupidity as an old person is, to where you've had this long experience of it. Whereas if you're young, you get into a boil because you see, go,
and you
just want to throttle them. And I've had that occasionally too. Yeah, how can you possibly believe this? And the thing that we are now and we want to show by our behavior that there is no excuse for stupid in 2020. There wasn't any excuse in 2019, in 2018, in 2017, and go back as far as we go. Now that the information is so readily available, the kinds of evasions and manipulations that go on in here that you see with evolutionists, you see them in climate science deniers and anti-vaxxers and flat earthers. I mean, there's a whole network of ones. But what you want to do is triage who you're dealing with in terms of target. And I would contend that because of their influence in this Kulturkampf network that is being enabled by Trump, that discussions with that network is far more important to do than with, say, the flat earther side, where there are no flat earthers directly connected to people in power. There are some geocentrists that are, and then there are lots of young earth creationists and intelligent designers that are. So that field is one where, in pushing back their credibility,
we say that now.
Yeah, who knows what will happen in the future? We don't know. And the thing is that if people don't stand up for what the facts are, given how incredibly available the facts are, that this is not an issue of, well, you have your alternative facts. No. There's just the data. And not every interpretation of a data is a legitimate one. And the point is that you need to think through. I wish I could find a creationist who's really uber serious about working out what their model is. There are a couple who tiptoe a little way into it. Kurt Wise does, Todd Wood does, Kavanaugh does, Jensen in his own way does.
Right.
But Snelling, the problem is when they tiptoe in and they start seeing the data not fitting the model, then they back up and they get back on their happy land and start repeating their mantras again. So the ones that intrigue me are the ones like, how long will Kurt Wise go before he wises up? Before there's like an epiphany moment when he realizes, or Kavanaugh for that matter,
or Wood,
to where the reason why the data looks evolutionary is because it's evolutionary.
Oh no, I think Wise knows. He was, after all, he was the one who, like, cut up his Bible to fit, or because he's like, he took out everything that was supernatural, whatever, and he realized that he could either keep the science or keep the creationism. And Todd Wood's the same way. I think they both know, or they have both. At least Todd Wood has said outright, evolution works. Yeah, you can.
Yeah. He's at least an honest one.
Yeah, he's
that
like,
he says,
it
clearly.
Works.
And so that he's going to believe the opposite because he wants it to. But the problem is they're faced with an awkward problem. The data are still there.
Right.
So every data point has to somehow fit into this model. And as we've seen from floating forests and fountains of the deep, and all of the extraordinarily strange things about mega sequences and whopper sands, that's another topic that pops up in the thing. That's a fairly recent one that's just cropped up in the creationist literature. There's a lot of straw grasping and gotcha things, and then a lot of mantra repeating. One of the things that it's way more obsessive at acts and facts than anywhere else I've ever seen is the pundit repeats the thing, and then he repeats it the next month, and then he writes another posting, which is the next month, and it's just ding, 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 where they're going, here's the mantra, I've got footnotes, don't check the footnotes, here's the mantra, here's some more footnotes, the same.
It puts the lotion on its scanner, gets the hose again.
Yeah. And there's so I think that they're trying to hypnotize their flock to thinking of it is that they repeat it long enough. How many of them seriously recognize it? Because you do get into these hissy fit fights over a lot of the particulars.
Well,
Hebert and that, saying, well, accelerated decay, but he buries it in a footnote. He puts it in a little teeny footnote where it says, oh, by the way, this will apparently melt the earth.
I mean, it also kind of makes you wonder how many creationists actually read Acts and Facts.
That's another question,
I don't
and
think
vice
a whole
versa.
Lot.
That what they get is the cartoon, the headline. So the headline is "Evolution fails again. Big Bang cosmology is a crock." They'll have a really apocalyptic, and intelligent design does exactly the same thing. They get these little gotcha, they're tabloid style things, and then when you start looking at the content of it. In the case of Minton, do you ever even bring up the topic that's in your headline?
Oh my God. Yeah, I think I make a point somewhere in there. It's like, is he ever going to actually get to Tiktaalik?
Yeah, can he get to the point here?
Because it's just so hilarious because he spends over half the chapter talking about other lobe-finned fish, none of which he ever accounts for in baraminology. Wonder why.
Mm-hmm. Now, another thing is that everything that I'm doing here in this project feeds back into the TIP project, because every little source that you and I track down goes into the field as to something that's been cited by creationists or not, which means my little magic numbers are calculating, and that means I'm measuring ever more accurately the entire field of what anti-evolutionists have actually cited in the technical field. And so this is something that nobody's measured before. I'm pioneering it. If there's a reason for supporting the TIP project at GoFundMe or Patreon, that's one of them. It's that I'm literally doing work nobody's ever measured before. And as my intention is that the project is going to continue beyond me, this is a thing everybody will be able to build on, to where we won't have to guesstimate, well, how much do creationists really interact with that data field? No, I'm measuring it. We're measuring it. And so we don't have to surmise at what elements are coming up. And when I'm in debates and that with people and things with, I'm seeing people on Twitter and somebody brings up a technical paper, I can check over, ooh, that sounds familiar. And I check and it's in my bibliography, and I'll check on my references and I'll go, black box. It's been nicked from a quote line somewhere. It's something that he's nicked from a creationist. You'll find people who Hacking and others have done this sort of thing where they'll cite the technical paper. Well, they didn't find this on their own because of their own diligent reading. No, they've nicked it from a secondary source.
Right.
And now you can ask, well, shall we talk about that secondary source? And that now gives you a springboard to be able to deal with that kind of thing so that you can push back when they try to bullshit on technical literature. And don't be intimidated by the PhDs at the top, because we've determined that, hey, gods, they're just as bad as Kent Hovind. They're just doing it with a few more footnotes. Well, I mean, a lot more footnotes.
Yeah, if they're citing evolutionary literature in an anti-evolution argument, likely, almost 100% likely, they're misrepresenting the paper.
Yeah. And even though technically only one of them is a young Earth creationist, Paul Nelson, the section that we've got with Bugs and Nelson going on orphan genes, I had more fun looking through that with you, because it's just, Bugs has either Bugs is just kind of deferring to Nelson on this bit, but the fact is that they literally bring up all the technical literature needed to blow their argument to smithereens, and yet they're not noticing it. Well, which is, in case you don't remember what orphan genes are, ORPHANS, they're genes that don't apparently have a homology with other previous genes, which of course immediately the creationists think that's because they were designed out of thin air. Poof, I guess. But all that really means is that search algorithms that are attempting to find matches are not finding an immediate match, which means that it could be that something, if it happened in a very quick thing a long time ago, it's had a long time to have point mutations, the algorithms won't find it. And worse, as has been pointed out in several cases, if the thing is a retrotransposon from a virus or from another organism, it won't show up because it doesn't have it isn't a derivative of the thing in its own lineage. It's an import. Mm-hmm. And that's another reason why some of these things haven't popped up, these viral retrotransposons. But they still have a natural mechanism as to how they do stuff, and they do all sorts of things naturally. So they were an intriguing subject matter. And to see Bugs and Nelson tiptoe their way around that data field that was literally under their own nose, they had no excuse for not discussing that stuff.
Well, that could be said of all of them, couldn't it? I mean, every time they cite every time Georgia Purdom cites a paper on mutations, or someone cites was it Leitner cited a paper on mammal phylogeny? Every time they do that, they blow their own argument to smithereens. Yeah.
And they, from a source methods point of view, it's the worst thing they could possibly do, because they're going, here's the science source that helps us, a regular science source, and then you go looking up the regular science source, and look what happens. You read the original science source, and you discover that it doesn't say quite what they say it does. They're suppressing information, and worse, you've now learned something that you didn't know before. So not only do you know as much as the creationists, you actually end up knowing more. And if you do follow-up, especially if it's an older paper, that was one of the common lessons that you learn. If you find a creationist citing an old technical paper, you want to find out what's happened to that since. Because what are the odds that work in this field stopped in 1985?
No one talked about it ever again.
Yeah, nobody ever dealt with it.
Yeah.
And so it's either an area where it's just effectively been resolved, and that's why it's not an active area of research. And now you're going to find out from later papers. The other one to do is to find out what the authors of the papers have done since.
Right.
So the odds are that if Schmidlap et al. 2004 was writing on a particular topic, that it's going to be the Schmidlap team in 2016 doing work on the field. And so you can follow up on them that way. There's a bunch of little trick tools to work your way around through that data field and to get caught up to speed. And you can use Wikipedia on a lot of these things because they'll often give you flags, both positive and negative. One flag is that you'll find that, oh my God, you look at this mammoth amount of technical literature and everything is broken down by subcategories. That's a well-covered field on Wikipedia. In other words, you'll find the place where you'll most likely find it, where you find crickets, is when you're looking at a new fossil that's been found. And you look on Wikipedia and there's like, this is a new fossil. And there's no references. That's because nothing's been published on it yet. So that means you immediately put a flag up on there that is not that it's non-existent, but you're probably getting it from like a secondary source, a news press release, that sort of thing, which means you treat it in a little holding file. Don't make too much out of it. Let the dust settle first. Don't jump into it.
Oh, yeah. Like that. There was a paper late last year that was on, was it Pategopteryx, I think? And it was classifying this, what has been considered, or what was considered a flightless early bird as actually as a non-avian theropod related to this other group, and it was very intriguing, but I think it's kind of fallen out now. I think that the analysis wasn't recovered in later studies. So yeah, exactly. Wait for the dust to settle.
Gotta let the dust settle, and that's another little forensic clue in often picking up. You get ones that call attention to there were true birds back in the Triassic. And no, but we know what you're drawing off of, don't we?
Proto-Avis, yep.
Yeah. And so those are things where you can build up eventually if you become an anal retentive fart like me, that you get a set of litmus test items that you have that you can use as ways to pigeonhole things systematically.
We did put somewhere in this book the origin of the claim for why the average dinosaur size was that of a sheep, right? We put that in there somewhere.
If not, we'll have to put it in for
because we have to. We can't possibly miss that one.
Keep that in your head. I don't think we directly mentioned it, but I think I put the references for it in preparation for the flood chapter in the second book.
No, that's right. The chapter where that's mentioned is Ken Ham's chapter, What Happened to the Dinosaurs, which we will write about. We have a chapter about dinosaurs in the next one, so that's probably where that will fit in. But, oh my God, that's one of the absolute funniest... of, like, all the things in creationism that they say are stupid. Should we tell them, or should we make them wait?
It's that they were relying ultimately on a reference from Michael Crichton's novel.
From Jurassic Park. Literally, Ken Ham relied on a throwaway comment in Jurassic Park.
Novel.
Oh my God. How?
Well, no one is ever going to accuse Ken Ham of being a rigorous scholar.
I mean, yeah, that's... he could have cited creationist literature. He literally cited a sci-fi novel as his evidence.
You get a lot of that. You get these weird daisy chains that pop up, and it occurs most frequently from just the tendency of the Tortugan mind not to fact check their raw material. And I'll give them that. Most of the creationists try to be fairly careful, at least in the apologetic element of it. But some of them show a sloppiness. It doesn't surprise me what Snelling ends up with, because I frequently find that Snelling will get the footnote references wrong in little minor ways. He gets the dates wrong. He'll misspell names. He'll put in authors that weren't there to begin with. In other words, he gets things clumsy going. And we have a thing in the new book where we're mentioning Hush and Austin and their non-existent the Morrison mystery, I think they called it. Were supposedly these clams and and that were a mysterious thing for evolutionists. And I contacted the actual author of this supposed paper, and he had no clue what the hell they were talking about. So somewhere down the road, they had misunderstood, either one of them, probably Hush, because Austin's not that meticulous when it comes to referencing, that had gotten something in their head, and they just kept percolating and never, they kept dealing with it, but they never fact checked the original material, and it just steeped and solidified. But as I know from firsthand in working out the material for this new book, it's easy to slip up little details. I'm cross-checking to make sure that the reference bibliography matches up with the referencing in the text, so that everything that's mentioned in the text is in the bibliography, and everything in the bibliography is actually alluded to in the text. And several cases I've come up where, oops, forgot to put that in the bibliography. Even Stephen Jay Gould could make that mistake every once in a while, but it's going to be a high hurdle for us. But they all have really low hurdles in creationism. It's very, very low.
I mean,
and they don't even
it's on the floor. The
Yeah.
bar is
Well,
on
anyway,
the floor.
we've slid a half hour overtime, and we're probably boring everybody to death. So let's snip up for today, and we'll be back next week. And we will have another time of discussing about stuff, by which time we'll be even closer to the new book. Everybody get your little Amazon gift cards out there to attack and strike once that becomes available. It'll be structured for a Kindle as well, so it'll be available for their book readers too.
And hello everyone in the chat. Hello TD Lane and Brian Stevens and Heat Shield.
Oh yeah, lots of names there. TD Lane, I interact with a lot on Twitter.
Yeah, hello everyone. I see you now. I just opened it up. Sorry. And Beej was there. I'm sorry we ignored you. And Immutable Destiny. And Puffaluffagus. And
Puffaluffagus is a patron. Thank you.
And everybody. Thanks everybody.
Yeah. We can't do it without you. I'll keep at it no matter what. But it's a lot easier the more people out there that are helping, and more people that tell people about it, gradually build up kind of a reputation that RJ is not an idiot, and that if I come to the judgments that I do, as Jackson does, and Pelagia and all the other people involved in it, that you don't want to just make an apologetic argument. You want to know what actually happened. You want to make a true thing. You want to understand what is the true thing, and you want to fairly arrive at it. And that's the quest that we're all on. And there's so much stupid out there that we just can't shut up in telling people why it's stupid.
Yeah, and it's even better when you know the true stuff, because the true stuff is 11 really times out of 10
cool.
Yeah, it's way cooler than the fake
Way
stuff.
cooler. The fictional fairy tales that were made up by religions are nice for 3D movies. They're Michael Bay level of stuff there, but the reality is just absolutely astonishing about the diversity and amazement of how living systems have developed over time, how we have come about as a species, how mountain ranges have been thrust up and continents have moved and
they have been thrusting.
Have shifted. Yeah. It's such an exhilarating epic that good heavens, why would you want to believe in the fairy tale when you got the real thing? It's way better. It's like having like nothing but like spun sugar gunk when you can have a nourishing meal of stuff.
The history of not only the earth but also the people who have done the research into it and all of that, and it's just infinitely more interesting than anything.
The personalities and things. If you have an interest in that area, boy, we can't help digressing. Read the biographies of Alfred Wallace and of Darwin and of Hutton.
Read Voyage to the Beagle.
Yeah, that there's so many of the different people out there. There's personalities involved. There's tussles that you'll learn more about the nature of science. Look at there's several books out, and we allude to it in the book, of the fist fight between Lavoisier and Priestley over oxygen phlogiston, and that those are all connecting up with the point about how politics and the life that you lead and the times you lead in, individuals have personalities, they have cliques of backers and supporters, and you can never divorce that from the scientific findings they did as well, but it's part of a social environment. And that's occurring all the way down the line. You can't really get a good sense about what's going on in genetics and eugenics, for that matter, if you don't know the context of 1900 through to the 1940s and the scientific racism and Nazism and the Soviet Union and socialist notions and their weird ideas about genetics that's off in a different direction. And so you get all of that. You can't disconnect that world and understand it fully. So it's all very, very dramatic stuff. And so you can catch the biography ends of it. You can catch the technical science end of it. You can dive in and find the websites that have the technical literature. And hopefully we want to wean people off of the dilettante that just looks at the little web blog and maybe once in a while the video, but not look behind the scenes at what the material is. Because if those aren't acting as window and door openers that prod you to research more, then you're just kind of bouncing off of the stuff. I think it's much more exciting when you start diving down below and finding more of the material to look at, because it's just cool.
Indeed.
Yeah. Well, see you next week. Let's shut down before we go on forever.
Hey, don't tempt us. All right.
Yeah,
Bye,
yeah.
everybody.
Bye. Next week.